Hello, everyone. I'm just going to check that the captions are working. They seem like they are. Hooray! I think that for once I have gotten things set up properly from the beginning. That's very exciting. It's a milestone to have it actually all work the right time, the first time. Check that out. Making history. I like it. Uh, Welcome to Of Skin and Spokes. Got the name right on the first try today. Hooray! Um, Brain. It's hard. Uh, right. I like to start by describing myself. See, look, this is why I make an outline. When I lose my place, I can check out what I meant to say. Hi everyone. I am Shay. I am a white skinned, non binary human in their mid 30s. I have short brown hair that is slightly longer on the top. It's very curly, so you've got the kind of wild uncontainable corkscrew curls kind of happening all over the place right now. I am wearing a black tank top. You can see the outline of a yellow binder underneath it. Uh, Pretty much what I wear every single day because making decisions about what to wear sucks. And unless there is a compelling reason to do so, I don't make decisions. I just make it easy. Um, Yay. How have people's weeks been? I like to ask that every time. It's been it's been a pretty good week here this week. It's been like up and down. Every week has been up and down. It's gray and rainy. And it's also the warmest days that we've had so far, so just my body feels very confused right now. It's like, yay, it's spring, but also it's rainy and you're hot wearing a sweatshirt, but because it's raining, you're cold if you don't. My body gets very confused at this time of year. Doesn't do so well. I'm hoping that in like another 3, 4 weeks, we'll be past the worst of the up and down of spring. And then my body can just find all of the things that it doesn't like about summer to be cranky about. But that's like a more solid set of concerns. I don't know. Do other disabled people like get what I'm talking about how like your body isn't happy in any season, but like at least during summer and winter, the ways that your body are not happy are consistent. But during the spring and fall, I find like especially just like on the winter easing into spring and on the fall easing into winter side of things, my body just has like 6 weeks where every single morning it is dicey about whether or not I get out of bed. Yay. And I find like that time of year like the hardest time of year to know consistently like how I will be doing day to day, which makes it really hard to make plans. So I'm looking forward to, uh, even though sometimes it's not so fun, the things that my body likes to do in summer, because I get dehydrated super easily, and then my body's like, hey, let's stop being a body. And it's not fun to have to constantly be on top of that, but it's better than the up and down because then I can just make sure that I drink all the time and don't let myself get dehydrated. Yay! Uh, anyway, what else besides the weather? Oh, I finished the Wheel of the Cosmic Sisterhood this week. I will not spoil any of it at all. But to say that the ending has confused me, and I think that we're going, like, I now need to replay the game because I'm like, huh, this ending, that was an interesting ending. It didn't feel satisfying at all. It felt very mixed. And so I am very excited to play it again and see where different choices go. I think that we're going to try to stream that on Wednesday. I honestly have no idea if my computer will let us do this. My fan is going and it's already taking 40% of my CPU to get this up and broadcasting. So I feel a little bit nervous about trying to make that work uh, with a game. But I do think that, like, of all the games that I could pick, this one stands a reasonable chance of not being too much because the graphics are fairly light on it. It's mostly a like text-based game, so not a lot of moving. So I am hopeful that this will work. We're going to give it a try. We may pivot and do something else on Wednesday if it doesn't work. But I'm hoping that it will. It'll be a lot of fun. I think it'll be a fun game to play with people and make some decisions together about how we want to do that. Let's see. Da, 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 da. I'm dancing around. This week I also got to dance, which was really exciting and really fun. One of my projects is a project for manual wheelchair users, and we're doing a town hall about it on May 31st. Yes, May 31st in the afternoon. We're doing a town hall about what we have learned about talking to a whole bunch of manual wheelchair dancers across Canada and what their current sort of like training and support needs are and trying to meet that. And so we filmed a promo reel for that town hall this week. And I'm very excited about it. I got to dance for the first time in quite a long time. Um, it's really hard being a wheelchair dancer in Toronto. We don't have a integrated dance company or anyone who like regularly runs uh, integrated dance events or classes. There's some companies that like do work with wheelchair dancers here and there. Like it's not that there's no opportunities to work, but there's no regular opportunities to train and go to classes in the same way that there are in other cities where you're not just like crashing some random class that already exists and being like, hey, I'm showing up in my wheelchair. We're doing this thing. Um, so it's so much work to dance in the city uh, on a regular basis. I don't have the energy to do everything that it takes to have access to spaces to dance. So because we're filming this promo video, I got to dance on Monday, and that was lovely, and it feels really good. And now we're moving into the time of year where it's easy to just like go outside and dance. Um, so I'm really looking forward to being able to be outside and dance more over the next like many weeks. Um, it was lovely. I'm so excited that we got to do it, and I'm so excited to get to do more of it and to get to like bring everything that this brings to more wheelchair dancers in Canada. Because we need it. We need it so badly. We have no infrastructure at all to support our work. It's complicated. At least not like as a like I'll make it clear what I mean by that. Like at least not as a dedicated discipline of disability dance. Like Canada has several integrated dance companies, and that's great and that's fantastic. And certainly if we had an integrated dance company in Toronto, I would dance with them. Absolutely. But nowhere in Canada is there like a place to just be like, hey, all of us who are manual wheelchair users, how do we learn from each other? And I can't imagine that like or rather like I try and think about like any other discipline of dance or any other group of dancers that doesn't have a way for people who are dancing like in the same bodies to come together, even if we have different definitions of like what dance is. It's kind of wild. I'm going on a little bit of a tangent here, but I don't think that it's irrelevant. Um, because I think it says something like I asked when we brought this group of dancers together, I asked folks, I said like, what is the like largest number of other wheelchair users that you've ever been in space with at the same time. And for most of the folks on the call, and it was a call with six, hold on, let's see. It was a call with maybe 8 wheelchair users on a call at the same time. So not like a small number of manual wheelchair users, but also like not a huge number either. It was less than 10. And for, I think, everyone in the group, with maybe the exception of me, it was the most number of manual wheelchair users that we'd had in a single place at one time. And I find that so sad. Like, why do we not have places to come together and do things with our bodies because we all have the same body and we all understand how it works? I mean, to different degrees, like, but like that's not any different from a typical dancer movement class. You come into a space, you're all moving in the space in the same way. And though some of you might be more familiar with that way of moving and some of you might be less familiar with that way of moving, you're all moving in the same way, connected by like a discipline or a practice or an embodiment or a something. And we don't have that space as wheelchair dancers. Definitely not in Canada, but even the spaces that have been made for it internationally, I think that the Rolettes is really the only place that has actually like gone out and done something like that to deliberately say like, hey, let's make a space that's centered on manual wheelchair users and what they need. And I think that that's really cool, and we need more of that. All right. We can dive into the stuff that I wanted to talk about today, which is talking about Ready for Access, which I'm really excited about. But also, please feel free to, put stuff in the chat, interrupt me. Like I talked about last week on Twitch, the culture on Twitch is really different from like a formal presentation type thing or like a formal podcast where we would be able to, talk and edit it later and what have you. I really am welcoming and desiring interaction. Please feel free to type stuff in the chat, ask questions. We can go off topic. Topics are just a suggestion. So long as we talk a little bit about it at some point, it's all good. I mean, what am I trying to say? Like most of the time, because I've given the episode a title, at some point I should probably say at least something about the actual topic in case people are going looking for that information so that they can find it. But beyond that, if there's stuff that people have questions about, want to share experiences of their own, any of that, feel free to jump in the chat and say the things. It actually makes me more anxious to just monologue at a camera. So you're honestly doing me a favor because I feel very strange just talking and having no idea how people are receiving what I say. Especially as an autistic person, sometimes things need more context than I give them when they first come out of my mouth. Because without context, they can sometimes sound really awful. Well, they are really awful, like blatantly. Sometimes things that have come out of my mouth are really awful. And then I have to actually walk people through my thinking as to how I got to the thing that I said, because by the time you add the context, then it makes sense. And in the specific context, it's not actually awful. But if you don't understand the context, it's terrible sometimes. It's been bad. Anyway, that's not going to happen. But that's why it's helpful for me to have feedback in the comments that we're all talking about the same thing and that I'm making sense and that I'm not just making things up as I go along. You're probably hearing the dog bark a little bit in the background. She's usually pretty quiet, but she's decided that it's screaming hours. She's very cute. We call her our goblin. Her name's Lou. She is a pot cake. And like in practical terms, she's predominantly like a terrier lab mix. She's about 25, 30 pounds. She's very, very cute, very, very snuggly, has so much love, but is also an utter goblin. She has the goblin ways in her. And often that involves screaming at sounds that I cannot hear well enough to hear. So it's always a game. It's like, well, not a game. It's always like that fun thing of like, are you barking at something real that I just don't hear well enough to hear? Or are you being a butt about the world in general? It's 50-50. She's also got like intuition on her. Like sometimes it's like bark at the things before they happen. Anyway, that's the barking sound that we haven't had in the background before because she's usually corralled in the bedroom while we do this. Um, anyway, today I want to talk about Ready for Access. Um, oh, I'm so excited about it. I'm so excited to like tell people about it, tell people the whys about it and the what we're going to do. I suppose I should start with like what it is. Ready for Access is the business that I am in the process of launching. It's a disability user experience, not, it's a disability experience firm. And I've gone back and forth as to whether or not it's like, is it disability user experience? Is it disability experience? But really settling on it being a disability experience firm. And what that means is that we center the lived actual experience of disabled people as the ways that we make and guide our decisions. I don't know about anybody else, but I find laws around accessibility to be, by and large, rather meaningless. I spent a really good chunk of my like 20s and early 30s recognizing that human rights laws, they're really good on paper. And I think that that's like, they're critical and they're important. And like, it's not to not to like undermine the importance of having legislation on your side to get people to do the things that they don't want to do. And they're really an important part of like that two-tiered, like kind of, here's the carrot and here's the like goodies that you get for doing well. And here's the like threat of consequences for you to take it seriously so that there's, you know, more motivation to go in the direction of doing it well. But I also think that they are a pretty limited resource when things are not going well. I think that they're effective at like preemptively inspiring compliance with people who are motivated to do the right thing anyway. I think that they're not necessarily the best tool in terms of defining what a community actually needs. And then plus like it gets into all of the like tricky stuff about compliance and enforcement, and there's so much I could go on probably for the next 40 minutes about compliance and enforcement and all of those challenging aspects to like actually meaningfully increasing accessibility. Um, yeah, now that I've gotten myself distracted. So the laws don't work. Not fully, not on their own. They can do a really good job of inspiring people to want to do the right thing. And I think that that's a really important, like, symbolic part of what having anti-discrimination laws and, you know, accessible, you know, laws like the Accessible Canada Act, laws like the Americans with Disability Act, disabled people being enshrined in, you know, national and provincial and human rights codes, as well as, you know, human rights codes in other places. All of those things are really critical and important. But ultimately, like, in and of themselves, they don't boil down to disabled people actually having meaningful access. uh, and they're not really good tools at getting meaningful access for disabled people, because so often people want to look at these laws as if they're a checklist, and then they're like, oh yes, we are compliant because we once brought in an ASL interpreter when somebody asked us for that, as an example, without having to like recognize, well, a lot of the time, deaf people, when they're bringing ASL interpreters to things, or when they need ASL interpreters for events, I know, like for myself, for example, there might be times where I might check in with the interpreters in my network and be like, hey, are you available to interpret this, so long as they agree to pay for it? And can come to the organization and be like, I need an ASL interpreter. This is the person who I work with. They're available. They'll just need to invoice you. Is that okay? And most organizations will say, sure. But then say I go to an organization and now this time I need them to book it for whatever reason. Instead of asking my friend in the back end, this time I need them to go out and do the work. Or I'm somebody different, right? Like I'm somebody who doesn't do things that way, and they've had someone else come into the organization and do things this way. Then the organization will turn to you and be like, well, don't you book the interpreter? Like, don't we usually just like pay for it? Like, that isn't that how it usually works? And then you say, well, no, like you're supposed to do it. And then generally you have to teach them how to book an interpreter because somebody else took that labor away from them, when they were meant to do it. And so there's no standard way of like, the law can say like must provide ASL interpretation when requested for deaf and hard of hearing people, but the law doesn't give a framework for how that service provision happens. It gives a bit of a provision for who is responsible for the cost of the provision, but it really doesn't pay any attention to, well, did the deaf person just have to go out and spend 10 hours emailing a freelance interpreter list to find somebody who was available and take on all of that work, when that was work that the organization should have had an accessibility coordinator and that was their job to go and do? And it probably wouldn't have taken the accessibility coordinator 10 hours because they have, good relationships with interpreters, and interpreters who they prefer to work with at that point, and interpreters who are, colleagues, because they're in and out of the organization often because the organization is regularly doing good accessibility practices. And so this is where Ready for Access comes in. Like, really and truly, it's so weird sometimes being someone who works as an accessibility consultant. There is so much of this different experience of like what happens to me when I'm engaged in processes as an accessibility consultant or as a professional versus my like, hey, it's like Friday night and I want to go out experience as a disabled person. Or not even like it's Friday night and I want to go out. Like, hi, here I am, a dancer and an artist, and I'm applying for artistic professional development programs, versus here I am as someone who runs professional development programs for artists and disabled people, and non-disabled people now too. It's coming in too. Ready for Access is doing that, so I guess now non-disabled people too. The difference is absolutely wild. This past week, like I filled in a couple of applications for different programs, like either because Ready for Access is a new business, so we're eligible for all kinds of like business incubator programs and stuff, as well as some stuff in my own artistic practice. And all of the forms have on them, we welcome and encourage applicants from underrepresented communities, including people with disabilities, and hey, these are organizations that are at least like with it enough that disability is included in their list of communities that are underrepresented. But I already know that like at least one of these programs, it's going to be a really big fight to get the things that I need. It's an organization that like we've already been at it And the first time around, it wasn't worth it for what it was because of how intensely they wanted to go after it. In terms of like me saying things to them like, hey, asking for specific diagnoses for standard accommodations is really not necessary. I'm not asking you for anything super weird here. I'm asking for like confirmation that my standard accommodation measures can be used. And they wanted to come back with like basically just short of asking me for a doctor's note, and demanding to know like what my diagnoses were, and then coming back at me like countering my lived experience with legislation. So that is, makes me really nervous about what do organizations mean when they write, we welcome and encourage people from underrepresented communities? And are they able to accurately like assess their capacity to welcome and support the communities that they say that they're supporting? So often, the answer is that they are not accurately assessing their capacity to welcome and include disabled people. So often, we want to include disabled people, but we don't budget for including disabled people appropriately. We definitely do not time plan for disabled people appropriately. Particularly as someone who uses ASL interpretation, I love it when organizations basically are like, if you need ASL interpretation for this event, you must contact us a minimum of 4 weeks before the event. And they put out their promo like 4.5 weeks before the event, which means that if you're a deaf person who it takes, like, we know that social media penetration of promotional information is much slower than it used to be. Like, we used to be able to have, I feel like we used to more easily like flow information between groups. And now the way that algorithms and advertising have changed on social media platforms, it's a lot harder. And I know that like I don't find out about things often until just before they're about to happen, because it can take several rounds of, folks sharing and sharing and sharing until it gets into my network. So having like long lead times without allowing for your promotional stuff to penetrate into communities is not accessible. And I hate that I see that so often these days. And I recognize that like the alternative isn't great either. Like, certainly we don't have enough ASL interpreters to be preemptively booking them for everything and taking them out of the interpreter pool. But there has to be some kind of like better system than a deaf person having to plan their lives a month in advance. Sometimes I don't know if I have energy to go to something until the day of. And it just makes it that much harder to try and be a person who exists and does things in the world when half of the things that I'm interested in either don't expect there to be someone who needs ASL interpretation, wants to interrogate why that's necessary, particularly as someone who speaks, because, autism, hearing and speaking are the same. We know exactly how well you can hear by how well you speak. That's a thing, for sure. Yeah. So even when you're just like, I find that really like something that's so hard for me as a disabled person is just that difference between the ways when I'm perceived when I'm providing a service versus the ways that I'm perceived when I'm attempting to access a service. Where like when when you're providing a service, you're a colleague and you're, respected and you are trusted about what you need, right? And people just like assume, hey, they make the leap. They assume competency. They assume trustworthiness. They assume that, you know your body and you know your working practices. Shocker. And then suddenly, you go into being a service recipient, and then the like suspicion that gets cast upon you, it's wild. And people genuinely will look for reasons to trip you up. No joke, true story. I had a landlord who we had to go to the LLTB because he was attempting to illegally evict us. Well, illegally evict me. And I put in for the tribunal that I needed an ASL interpreter because, as a hard of hearing person going to a legal proceeding, yeah, I want to make sure that I have access to every single word that is spoken and not, risk missing something critical when, particularly as an ADHD person, I know how critical, like, tiny details on legal proceedings can be, and how likely I am to just, like, have them, like, come on, English words. Just, like, go over my head, like, just, like, slide right past me. Um, and not even notice that they're an important detail unless I'm paying exceptionally close attention to what's being said. Uh, and the landlord, like, literally filed an appeal for my accommodations for the tribunal because he didn't believe that I needed an interpreter and he thought that I was making up being disabled. I didn't need an interpreter to talk to him one on one, but it was a different context. So, yes, when you are a service recipient, people will genuinely undermine and like attempt to catch you out and attempt to like find you out of faking your disabilities for reasons that I don't even understand why. I don't understand what it gains to anyone to catch out people. Like, even if disabilities were being faked, like, what good does it do to spend that much time and energy trying to find people who are, when chances are good that, like, there's a different disability underlying the stuff that's going on, or there's trauma underlying what's going on. And either way, they are doing a thing that meets their needs in the best way that they know how. And, like, maybe it's not the most honest way of having those needs met, but also people have needs and that's okay. And you can just choose to walk away from engaging with that person if they're not doing something that you approve of. It's the joy of having autonomy in this world. Um, anyway, I think too, the thing that's been really wild for me as a consultant who's been doing this work for a while now is that I've really been able to see both sides. Before I was doing consultancy work, it was very, very hard for me to see that anyone was doing anything meaningful about disability. Because I was just having the service recipient experience of being essentially gaslit about my disabilities over and over and over again. And, would try and get into something and people would say, oh, yeah, it's accessible. We want disabled people there. Oh, but we didn't budget for ASL interpretation. We didn't budget for hearing accommodations or CART or any of that. We don't know how to deal with, manual wheelchair user, whatever it was, right? Like, the story of not caring and people just going on with what they were doing again and again. I think it was one of the first episodes that we did of the stream where I was like, yeah, like, you need to know that if you leave, people are going to do what they're doing anyway. That they're not going to stop because something's inaccessible. And that's very true. And it really took until I started doing consulting work to start to be able to see the other side of it and to see that there were actually, like, genuinely people out there who were interested in doing the work, who were interested in making their work accessible, who wanted the world to be better for disabled people. Um, and that's like something that's been so really joyful to see over the last few years is that there genuinely are organizations that are not doing this just because, the Accessible Canada Act is coming and by 2040 they're going to have to. They're doing it because they're looking around and saying, hey, this is something that's actually really important in our community and we want to do a better job of, widening who we mean when we say that we're including people. And some of the things that I've gotten away with doing inside of organizations to get more disabled people inside of them, to give disabled people better experiences when they're on the inside of those organizations, are things that, like, my 25-year-old self would have never thought that I would ever be able to get away with. Um, and that makes me really happy. And it makes me really happy to know that even though sometimes, when I close my computer for the day and I go back to just being a person, I might experience 5,000 terrible ableist things that go on, but that's not the entirety of my experience anymore. And that's like also experiences that I can bring in to the organizations that are doing the work to make things better, um, to help them appreciate like how dramatically things have to shift to really be inclusive for disabled people. Um, there's a public art project that's going on, where, like, in the last little bit, like, we've had to have conversations about what is it like to be in public as a visibly disabled person. And talking about, like, the reality that if you are a wheelchair user who goes out in public, there's a pretty good chance that you're going to be physically assaulted, going outside of your house, especially if you're by yourself. Like, people don't know how to react to disabled people, like, loitering in public. Uh, Sometimes they think that you're panhandling. Sometimes they think that you're lost. Sometimes they don't even know what to think. But, like, if you're just like, hey, it's a nice sunny day and I'm going to sit out here and enjoy the sun and listen to my music, you're not allowed to do that, apparently. Nope, nope. There must be something wrong. People will attempt to intervene. I also think that it's really funny that people have, like, no concept of, like, when is, like, a situation that they need to intervene with a manual wheelchair user and, like, when they don't. Um, I'm getting really off topic. But that's okay. It is what it is. Um, a couple of years ago, I had this really long wheelchair ride that I did, and I broke my chair coming back. Um, and, like, broke it to the point where I'd lost, like, my front caster. Like, I'd lost too many screws out of it and the caster just wouldn't hold. And so I had to actually, like, carry my wheelchair while walking. I think it was about a kilometer away from my house, which is about, like, at that point in time was the absolute maximum I could walk, and there was, like, a good chance I was hurting myself walking even that far. Um, and so I couldn't find anyone to come and, like, get me from where I had crash landed. And so there was no other choice. And I literally, like, hefted my wheelchair over my shoulder and carried it home over my shoulder because there was nothing else for me to do about that situation. But meanwhile, like, if I'm trying to get on the bus and I'm, like, just waiting for people to get off the bus, someone will come up behind me and try and push me. Like, no concept whatsoever of, like, when a wheelchair user actually needs help versus when they don't. Um, but yeah, like, things are genuinely changing, in the world, and I'm seeing it every day, and I'm seeing more and more of it. There's a lot that makes me cringe about people's first attempts, but there's also a lot of, like, genuinely good stuff. And for real, the biggest barrier for people mostly just seems to be that they don't know where to start, and that they want to do things, they have no idea where to start, they know that they don't know, but they don't even know what they don't know yet. Um, and that's like, that's really in general where people are at on a day-to-day basis right now. They want to do better, they don't know where to start, they don't know how to start having a conversation. And that's really what Ready for Access is meant to be about, is it's meant to be a place where folks can start to have that conversation, where we can go in and say, it's okay if you don't know anything in this moment, because we're going to do some things. And then you're going to know more than you did a little while ago. And where we can be the people to do that work so that other disabled people don't have to be the people constantly doing that work, where that doesn't have to be invisible, marginalized labor anymore, which is, I think, like such an important thing. Because so often, it even happened to me recently, of me trying to say, like, hey, you guys need some training. And folks turned around and were like, well, do you want to come in and train us? I'm like, no, I'm a participant here. Like, find somebody else. This is not my role in this space. And we get asked to do that a lot. And like, sometimes when you're like newer in your disability journey too, like you might be really eager to take on that work and to say like, hey, like, yeah, okay, I'm excited to teach people and I'm excited that people are going to listen to me. Um, I'll offer folks a piece of advice from somebody who's been in this like world for a really long time. I think really carefully about where you want to do that and where you don't. And I'm not going to tell anyone like not to do that. There's absolutely places where, because it needs to be about what you need and you're the only disabled person in that environment, like there are really good reasons to want to do that work in certain places. Um, the one thing that I find though is that it can put you in a really challenging place with your relationships in those spaces. Um, Having the dual role of like educator and participant can be really heartbreaking, especially if it doesn't go well. Especially like if you think, like if your idea going in is, okay, I'm going to do this workshop, and then they're going to understand what it is they have to do and understand all of the changes that they have to make, versus their understanding of like, oh, well, we'll do this workshop and then it will be accessible. Um, it can be really hard and it can really damage those relationships. And it can make you look at the people who you're working with in a really different way. I think that that's a part about disability that we don't, that some disabled people do talk about a lot, about how disability can really harm relationships, in ways that they cannot be easily repaired. And there's just an immense amount of damage that occurs. Um, it can be really hard to realize that your colleagues don't care enough about you as a person to change their practices, or your group members, or what have you. Um, I was recently in an experience where like I put a lot of work into making something that I did accessible, so that no matter what, like I didn't even necessarily know for sure that there would be disabled people in the audience or not, but it didn't matter. The idea that someone might come into something that I was doing and not be able to have access to it was just too upsetting, and so I had to do the work. Um, and it was really upsetting that my colleagues in that space, who were also putting together work for this showcase, didn't put work into making their work accessible to me, where there was like someone who was known to need work to be accessible in a particular way, in the cohort. And it's not the only cohort where it's happened. Like I've seen it happen in other spaces, even in disability spaces. We often will make work partially accessible, because there's like, being real, like there's not enough funding to make everything fully accessible to everyone all the time, as much as I wish that that was true. And a lot of the a lot of the access work that you see in the arts community at the moment is people like passionately putting in time and energy that they're not getting paid for because they care about making sure that it's accessible to other people. There's just so little like funding at the moment in the arts, with arts grants acceptance rates being as low as they are. It's a really tough time at the moment to actually generate like comprehensive project budgets, particularly when it's, you know, emerging disabled creators who are pushing the boundaries of what is doable with accessibility. So a lot of the time it's folks who are taking the extra time to do it. And so when people are bringing in their work to disability professional development opportunities, sometimes it doesn't have access for everybody in the room to actually be able to take in other people's work. And it's a big problem. And it's something that we're still like grappling with, about like setting norms around what are the minimum access features that work should have to be shown in group settings, or what are the supports the programs need to provide so that disabled artists have the resources that they need to create the access so that all of us can have access to something together in an equitable setting. And that's really like fundamentally like what Ready for Access is trying to do, is it's working within community and between community and organizations to create operational definitions about what it means to be accessible, centered on how we as disabled people experience the efforts of different organizations, be them in the disability community, be them outside of the disability community, working to make what they're doing accessible to our community. And that's the work that I've been doing for a really long time, but now we get to make it bigger, which is really exciting. So now some of the things that we're going to be doing are offering professional development certificates so that organizations can more proactively demonstrate that they've actually taken on this learning, because they will have certificates. And similar to the concept of how doing like the Safe Space campaign in the 2000s for queer and trans folks was a way of getting like more awareness of queer and trans issues into workplaces and into organizations. And it was a first step, right? Like, you know, anyone who was queer and trans in the 2000s would look at the Safe Space training and say, okay, this is a good start, but there's a lot of things that weren't covered. That's absolutely the same thing that's going to happen with the Access Fundamentals work. It's a good start. It does not start to change things in organizations. It just gives them vocabulary and definitions to understand what's going on in their communities at that like first initial stage. But that's the first step of the change process. People have to actually see and understand what changes they're going to make and understand it from like different perspectives. And at the very least, it means that disabled people don't have to go in and give that like disability 101 presentation for things that they're attempting to access themselves anymore. But we're moving into like even cooler and like more exciting things from there too. At the moment, we've got 2 certificates that are just like fundamentals, but then everything else builds off of that. And so we're building like proper certificates for accessible program planning, taking the skills of like designing accessible programs into mainstream program planning practices. We same thing with event planning, and like looking at like larger scale events too, like conferences and stuff, which is really exciting. I've been supporting conferences with being accessible for well over a decade now, so I'm really excited to formalize some of those learnings and get them in the hands of other folks doing the work. And then we're moving into like a whole series of certificates for the arts too. We're going to do a certificate for arts presenters, a certificate for like artist creators or producer creators, probably one on just like productions and access as well, because that's like a whole other beast. Probably some like deep dives on things like relaxed performance and creative access features, which makes me so excited too. And so all of that stuff is coming. I'm so excited about being able to get information about it out there. It's so hard. I wish that I was at like my full capacity right now because things would be coming a lot faster, but I can only work with where my body is at. And then all of that stuff is leading to the piece that I am the most excited about, which is accessibility certifications and having accessibility certification tiers that are actually going to work for the disability community. Most of the existing certifications that are out there are really about space. They're really about physical layout of space for disabled people. Uh, there's not a lot that actually looks at like the processes of how disabled people interact within an organization or when an organization is offering something to the public to say like this will be an accessible experience or not. And so that is the space where Ready for Access is really excited to come in and to be able to work with folks who are putting on events to be able to like have their events certified as meeting particular accessibility standards so that when you're looking at an event's information, you can easily tell what they mean by when they say that this event welcomes disabled people. Because there will be, really clear communication from the organization about exactly what types of access there will be. Like, that's a pretty key fundamental cornerstone for me about accessibility certification is that organizations have to be much more transparent about the accessibility that they know how to provide and what they are considering to be like the accommodations that they're ready to implement versus the ones that they need more training or more lead time or more like awareness to be able to implement well. As well as because it's tiered, um, different tiers will mean different things, and to be able to see the like Ready for Access, this level of accessibility certified, gives folks a space to understand exactly what that means sort of at a glance and to realize that then, oh, look, this is an organization that, has engaged with disabled people, has actually talked to disabled people about their accessibility plan. A disabled person has looked at it and signed off on it and said this is reasonable given what you're proposing to do within the context, right? Because I think that that's like the really key thing is accessibility is so contextual. It depends on who is trying to do what and how are you trying to do it. And as you change any of those factors, what is necessary for it to be accessible changes. A room full of deafblind people need a whole bunch of different accommodations than a room full of manual wheelchair users do. Even if there's manual wheelchair users in both rooms, those needs will be different because different disabilities mean, different people mean different ways of experiencing a disability. And you can have a room full of people who all, share either an access need or share a particular disability, and everyone will deal with it in a different way. And so, how do we make things accessible to a host of different needs when those needs may conflict with each other at times? And what are the ways that we plan for it? And what are the ways that we talk about it? Especially knowing, for example, that, deaf people on average prefer really bright rooms with really good lighting so that they can see people's faces clearly, whereas many folks with low vision often prefer dimmer lighting, or folks with migraines or other sensitivities prefer dimmer lighting. And then people with deaf blindness deaf blind people may want, really strong lighting at some times and really dim lighting at other times, or for strong lighting if it's shined on other people but dimmer on their faces. And all of those needs are valid and all of those needs need to be accommodated. And how do you figure out how it all goes together? It's a really fun mystery, and I find it like the little Rubik's cube of like how do we nudge everything to go all together in the way that it's going to work for the most people possible. But it's really intimidating, especially if you don't understand the communities that are already a part of your community. And at the same time, like, disabled people are right. It's 2024. We have so much information about how to make accommodations happen for complexly disabled people, that there really is no excuse anymore either. And we shouldn't have to start at the beginning just because other people are new on their journey. We shouldn't have to put our lives on hold while, you know, Bob from HR gets caught up on how to book interpreters because nobody's ever asked Bob to book an interpreter before. I think that that's like a really key piece of it, is like who can step in to do the labor so that we can catch people up quickly and our lives don't have to be on hold while other people still get the chance to be held and to learn. And it's balancing a competing need of like learning can only happen in safety. Disabled people are right to be upset when their needs aren't being met. And it's not about tone policing disabled people and saying that they shouldn't be upset about not having their needs met. But it's about having the right services and supports in place so that, you know, while Bob is still learning to book ASL interpreters, Sally doesn't have to go without what she needs just because Bob didn't know. And how do we create worlds where all of those possibilities are possible? And I think that that's what really, like, looking at accessibility from the lens of somebody's personal lived experience and their experience of the event or the experience of the offering or the experience of the workplace, whatever it is, versus looking at it from legislation makes a really big difference in terms of the outcomes, because the legislation ultimately makes space for Bob's learning and prioritizes, like, oh, the organization made a good faith attempt, they asked and they tried and they weren't able to do it, that satisfies our requirements. But it still misses the fact that discrimination occurred because Sally was supposed to do something that Sally then couldn't do. And that's how we start to change things, I guess, is by like fundamentally saying, well, whether or not Sally got to do the thing is actually more important than whether or not you met the legal obligations. Outcomes are really important here, and we need to do better at getting more disabled people accessible outcomes with way less fighting. And we do that by teaching people and giving them like a safe space to learn, and by giving them like standardized like a standardized operational definition of what it means to be accessible, and of like how to implement accessibility meaningfully within organizations and within processes and within programs and within all of the things that we do. Yeah. And I'm really excited about it. I'm excited about the ways that it's going to take work off of the disability community to do this work. I'm excited about all of the places where it's going to go, all the places that it's going to expand into. This is really just the beginning. It's going to be so much more too. We're just getting started. There's a lot about this world and how accessible it is or isn't that I have things that I want to do about. And I'm really glad that Ready for Access is going to give us a container to be able to do those things. In the meantime, one of the things that I'm planning for our launch over May, June, and then we're going to take a break over July and August because summer, and then over the fall, is we're going to be having a professional development webinar series where I'm inviting a whole bunch of folks who I've done work with to have conversations about the work that we've done, the changes that we've made, all of that. None of that's going to be happening on Twitch. They're going to be registration webinars. So find us at the Ready for Access social medias. We're on Instagram, Facebook, LinkedIn. We'll be on YouTube soon because things are going to be hosted on YouTube as well. But if you give those channels a follow, there's some really, really cool stuff coming up that's not firmed up enough yet for me to talk about it in detail, but it's coming, and I'm very excited about it. And hopefully towards the end of next week, there will be more details on that. All right. We have hit 5 o'clock. Thank you for hanging out with me today and putting up with all of my random brain tangents to talk about sort of the I guess like the intention of today was really to talk about what is the connection between what I experience as a disabled person and how does that translate into what Ready for Access is offering, and to really start like a conversation among disability community about what having a community defined accessibility standard that's centered around our experiences can do for us. So yeah, um, thanks for watching. Stay tuned, more is coming, and come back on Wednesday to see if my computer can actually let us play some games together, and we'll try give that a try. If not, we'll figure something else out. Have a great night, everyone. Bye.